In today's video, I'm going to be embarking on my next challenge playthrough for the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. For this one, I want to try my hand at completing the Thieves Guild while playing as a Barbarian. For this one, I don't really have any rules or guidelines that I'd like to follow. Mostly, I want to play through this questline, act as sort of a Barbarian would during the quests, and see how far it gets me. My goal is to probably put stealth to the side and focus on getting what I want through the means of violence. As you could probably expect, the first couple of quests should be no issue. However, it's the latter half of the quest line that I'm very curious to see how it's going to play out. So without further ado, let's get into the playthrough. As a quick note, I'm currently recording this part after I got what I wanted out of this run. To be completely honest, for most of these quests, I had to go out of my way to make the excitement happen, as organically, challenge-wise, they were hard to come by. In the end, I talked about some conclusions that I came to with the Thieves Guild and some changes I'd make for future challenge runs. But for now though, I hope you enjoy it.
Capital!
For my character's race, I picked an orc. For their class, I specifically chose the Barbarian set. The specialization is in combat, the favorite attributes are strength and speed. The major skills are armor, athletics, blade, block, blunt, hand-to-hand, and light armor. Then finally, for the star sign, I picked the warrior, which gives a plus 10 bonus to both strength and endurance. To actually get in contact with the Thieves Guild, I went over to the Imperial City and gave the biggest swing that I could at an Imperial Watchman's head.
What's going on? Stop! You violated the law!
From there, I went to jail, did my time, and got released on an account of losing 1 skill point to heavy armor, which I didn't really mind that much. From there, I just waited around for Mivrana Arano to pay me a visit, but the only issue is that she never came. I waited for quite some time in the Imperial City, and yet there was no message from the Grey Fox. Resorting to just learning about the faction through City Swimmer, I fast traveled to Breville, waited around for daytime, and then lo and behold, Mivrana finally showed up. She handed me the note, and from there, it was off to the races for Dariloth Garden. Waiting for midnight, I approached the trio, spoke with Armand Kristoff, he gave us the whole initiation spiel, told us about the competition, and then it was go time. To be honest, I couldn't remember where Amantius Electus' house was. I knew that Methridel knew though, so I just followed her. In the past, when I've done the initiation quest, normally Methridel is far outpacing me. But I guess since I picked the Barbarian class, I have a nice buff to my speed, so it was cool to actually be able to keep up. The two of us arrived at Electus' home, she went in, and I was left outside picking the lock. I had to be really careful because I only had 1 lockpick here, but as soon as I made it inside, I went straight for the desk, took the diary, and that was pretty much that for May the Best Thief win.
Thief! You stole that diary from me! Now I have to wait to get into the guild!
Returning back to the Garden of Dariloth, I handed the diary over to Armand and he welcomed me to the guild. May the Best Thief win is honestly no trouble for a barbarian or pretty much any class. There really isn't that much sneaking involved and there's nobody that really gets in your way besides Methridel. Of course, if you were to fail this competition, there are other means to obtain the diary or even other tasks that you're given to get into the faction, so this sort of initiation is probably the easiest one all around. After the whole talk with Armand Kristoff, I quickly went back to Vilverin in order to get some more barbarian appropriate gear. Then from there I fast traveled over to Bruma where I could steal some goods and fence them over to Ongar. My most productive spot happened to be the Mages Guild Hall. Right in the front entrance there was nobody there, so I scoured through the guild's books, took all of their apparatus, moved around to different rooms just to stay away from prying eyes, and ultimately ended up making off with a huge score. Once all was said and done, I fenced over 500 gold worth of products to Ongar, and that definitely set me way ahead for independent thievery. Returning to Armand, he gave me the quest of untaxing the poor. He told me to sneak into Hieronymus Lex's quarters, and from there steal the tax records. The guard tower is super easy and free to get into. The first level isn't considered trespassing, but ascending up the ladder to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th is. Picking the lock and getting into Hieronymus Lex's quarters, I saw the captain sleeping and thought that this would be an easy take. During my first attempt, all of my lock picks broke. and so I assumed that Lex might have a key on him. For some reason, my mind went for the Barbarian tactic of just trying to kill him and then taking the key, but then this turned into what I thought was a very clever play. I had never actually tried to kill Lex before, so if I actually managed to achieve that here and now, and the guard captain died, I wondered what was going to happen with the rest of this questline. It was also perfect because he was completely unarmed and in his pajamas. He still gave in one heck of a fight, and after I delivered what I thought was the killing blow, I realized how naive I was when I got the message saying that he was unconscious. I tried to loot the key, but it wouldn't let me, so I just reverted back and picked the lock to the desk. Taking the records and the gold from my troubles, I descended back down the watchtower, and the guards pretty much didn't even care that I was there.
Oh hey, sweet lady of Wayrest, oh hey, sweet lady of mine. Oh, I'll see you again, yes, I'll see you again, sweet lady of Wayrest, so fine.
Returning back to Armand, he took the records, told me I could keep the gold, and promoted me to the rank of footpad. Immediately after that conversation was done, I got the go-ahead from Independent Thievery and spoke again with the Red Guard. This time, he gave me the task of retrieving the bust of Shadenhall's late Countess. I knew that finally this would be a quest where things could get interesting. Fast traveling over to the major city and tossing 15 septims to one of the beggars, they told me to search down in the undercroft of the chapel, and to beware that it could be haunted.
Used to be anyone could visit her, but now it's off limits to the public.
Going into the chapel and picking the lock to the undercroft, I waited around for a bit in order to encounter the bodyguard. She came running in at me, and in one good swing with the warhammer, I absolutely flattened her. It felt pretty good, but then I got the quest notification that I had completely forgotten about. I of course remembered that there were blood prices, but I had no clue that they were worth over 1,000 gold. Taking Lathasa's bust, I exited the undercroft and began my mission of making amends to the guild. Fortunately, I had over 500 from my previous time doing independent thievery, but now I just had to double that. I went over to the Shadenhall Mages Guild Hall, stole every single piece of alchemical apparatus, book, potion, etc. Then I went into the Fighters Guild Hall and took some weapons, pelts, anything that I could really get my hands on. Thinking I'd be squared away, I sold every single thing that I had just looted, and was unfortunately still 27 gold shy. So for my next hit, I decided to go into the Chapel Hall. And honestly, there were some big scores here. Lots of valuable books, cups, silverware, utensils, food, beverages. There were a lot of things to get my hands on here. At one point, I stumbled a little too far and unleashed Pandora's box. This NPC kept following me around, but maybe because I was in the darkness, she couldn't actually see me, but there were a lot of close calls. Finally, I decided to leave, sold the rest of my goods to Ongar, and happily traveled back to the Imperial City in order to pay off my blood price. Funnily enough, I had completely forgotten that there was a second part to the Elven Maiden quest, so after getting the update, Methredel came rushing in, informed me of what was going on, and then it was off to Mavrana Arano's house to frame her for stealing the bust. There were eyes on me from all over the place, so I decided to just brave it, break into her home, and let off one big swing with my warhammer, but unfortunately she just went unconscious, so I placed the bust and ran off to Hieronymus Lex. I convinced him that she was the thief, followed him to her house, he accosted her and dragged her off to jail. Waiting until midnight, Armand Christophe showed up again, and upon speaking with him, he was happy that that whole situation was taken care of. However, he did say that I'd be temporarily kicked out of the guild due to killing that guard back in the chapel. Paying off the blood price of 1,000 gold, Armand promoted me to the rank of bandit and sent me over to the likes of Scriva for further contracts. Fast traveling over to Breville, I sought out the Khajiit, and she gave me the quest of Adarji's heirloom. Going over to Leowin, I spoke with D the Scalawag, and he told me the whereabouts for my person of interest. Adarji explained that it was Amusai who stole the ring from her, but she doesn't know where he is right now. After tossing a few gold in the direction of Mr. Scalawag, he tells me that Amusai was actually dragged off to jail. Going into the castle and descending to the dungeons, I slip past the guard on duty and pick the lock into the holding area. Encountering Amusai, he tells me that the ring actually belongs to the Countess Alessia, and that if I want it recovered, I'll have to get in close to her. Throwing more gold at Mr. Scalawag, he tells me that I should seek out Hladara Mothril, the handmaiden of the Countess. As an aside, I've likely heard it before, but this is the first time I ever recall an NPC telling me about the torture room. During my official run for the Thieves Guild, I don't recall any of the beggars telling me about it, but also maybe I never asked. Seeking out Hladara in the castle hall, I ask her about the Countess's routine as well as the torture chamber. She doesn't divulge any information at first, but after throwing a few septims her way, she begins to talk. She tells me that the passageway leads directly to the Count and Countess's quarters, and she also mentions that the Countess leaves on trip during the 15th of every month. I thought it'd be fun to try and blindside the Countess on the road, so I literally waited from the 4th of Heartfire all the way to the 15th. The unofficial wiki does point out that her schedule's kind of bugged, and that proved to be true from here because she did not make her way to Coral. Thinking I could take her in the streets, I took one big swing at her head with my warhammer and tried to whittle her health down from there. She was certainly a lot tougher than she looks, and after a certain point of enough health lost, she began to run away from me, and as I chased her, the guards chased me. Leaving the city limits, I noticed that her handmaiden was actually fighting against the guards. I guess she knew how horrible of a person Alessia actually was and decided to stand up against her. That didn't last long though, and soon the Countess went back inside of the city, and as I lined up for my kill, I faced down the firing squad.
Hate the fire! Getting tired?
From here, I just decided to use the secret entrance from the basement. It's gonna sound weird, but the torture room is actually one of my favorite rooms in this game, simply because of the secrecy surrounding it, as well as its sinister intentions. It's really good fuel for the hatred towards the Count and Countess of Leeuwin. Soon, I found myself nearing their quarters. Doing a bit more looting on the way, I actually found a handful of paintbrushes, which were about to come in handy. I watched the patrol walk in the other direction, and then slowly made my way towards their bedroom. Once inside, I put down the paintbrushes in order to cover the exit. From here, it was go time, and I began to swing away at the Countess. In a panic, both of them woke up and began to fight for their lives. Alessia made a break for the door while the guard tried to come in. Again though, the game got the better of me, and Alessia actually went down as unconscious. I had forgotten that she was deemed essential literally until this quest is finished. So I reverted to my boring save and picked the lock into the jewelry box. I took the heirloom along with everything else that was inside, and then from there safely exited the castle. Returning to Adarji, I handed over the heirloom, in which she gave me my 100 gold. Back in Breville, Skriva promoted me to the rank of Prowler and rewarded me with 200 more gold. So far, this questline has proven to be incredibly accessible for all classes and skill types. I really wanted to see the pros and cons for playing as a barbarian, but so far I haven't really been seeing anything that would make this playthrough easier or more difficult. However, that would soon change. Speaking with Skriva again, she gave me the quest of Misdirection. Speaking with Ragbag Buntara, she told me the location of Methredel's hideout. Methredel told me about the current state of the waterfront, how the Thieves Guild was in shambles, and finally her master plan to swerve Hieronymus Lex. I've always found the theft of Hromir's ice staff to be kind of comical. The Thieves Guild makes it out to be such a big deal to sneak into the Mages Guild, but it's only a matter of taking 2 different teleporters. It doesn't even really matter too if anybody sees you, as it takes a little bit for the trespassing charge to kick in. Erlov Jirol was pretty suspicious of me, so I did have to leave in a hurry, but I secured the ice staff and slipped the note into the Archmage's nightstand. Again, no sneaking, or more importantly violence needed. Handing the staff over to Methredel, she then told me to keep an eye on Lex. Going over to the waterfront,
Oh hey, sweet lady of Wayrest.
and nearing the guard captain, a Dremora foot soldier approached, handed him the note, and the rest was pretty much history. Methredel told me to go frame Ontis Vanis. His house was super easy to break into, including the upstairs. The staff was stored in his chest, and I returned to Skriva for my reward. I felt like I was going to be needing to pay off a blood price sooner than later, so I paid a visit to Luciana Galena and fenced off a lot of my stolen goods. Skriva then gave me my next contract of Lost Histories, and this one I was actually pretty excited for. I knew there'd be at least one person I'd get to fight with my Warhammer. Nigidius the Needy lady told me the story of how Theranos was caught for theft and dragged off to prison. Descending to the castle dungeons, I tried to convince the Skingrad jailer to let me go into the holding area, but he wasn't having any of it, and instead of going through the castle steward, I decided to let out my barbarian side. I began to clobber him with my warhammer, and to be honest, I thought he'd put up a more difficult fight. Maybe because he's a jailer, or perhaps because he's not an Imperial city guard, but he certainly wasn't that strong of an opponent. After committing the murder, I received the quest for blood price, which I knew was coming, but I was able to loot the castle keys off of his body. Down below, I came across my good friend Larthiar the Laggard.
Are you here to rescue me? You bastard! It's not like I killed her!
I covered my escape with paintbrushes and let Laggard out of his cell. I really wanted to hit him, so that's what I did, but unfortunately, he too was only knocked unconscious, but I wasn't sure why. I didn't know that he was an essential NPC. I suppose for this quest he gives vital information, but he's also an NPC that you can just bypass, so that was kinda confusing, but regardless, I continued onwards. Soon, I found myself in the wine cellar, pulled on the strange candle, and a door leading through the barrel opened up. I got myself caught in between a rock and a hard place here though. Blocking off my exit was an Imperial guard, really keen on arresting me, and just further along the path was the Pale Lady. Of course, the only option was to go forward, so I charged him with my warhammer, and actually managed to kill her with only a few swings. I stripped Theranos of all of his belongings, because I could sell those back to the guild, spoke with Amusai about the book, and then released him from his prison. Now this part here was the real kicker. The guard was still avidly trying to get to me. There was only one way in and one way out, and he was blocking it. Thinking this would have to end in violence, I marched up with my warhammer in hand, and for some strange reason, the guard just lost interest and started to walk away. I had never had that happen before, especially since I was right in front of him, but maybe because it was so dark he couldn't see me and there was a problem then with his coding or something. I have no clue, but it was the perfect time for us to make our escape. Amusai and I left the castle, and then he told me where Theranos hid the Lost Histories book. This was where I made a crucial error. I should have returned back to Scriva or to Armand Kristoff, had my fine removed, and then went back to Skingrad. However, because I went straight into the city, a guard arrested me and I was forced to serve some time. Regardless, I found and retrieved the book, brought it back to Scriva in Breville, and she rewarded me for my efforts. Not before I had to pay off the blood price though. Getting straight into the next contract, Scriva filled me in on how Hieronymus Lex needs to be permanently reassigned. I spoke with the beggar Penniless Ulvis, and he told me that I should speak with the castle's blacksmith. Arriving in the smithy, I kept the cycle of thievery going on by stealing from him, another follower of the Grey Fox. Orin opened up the castle's secret passageway, and it was up to Darahill's office for me. Casually walking past the guard on duty, I broke into her desk and took the list of recommendations. Returning back to Penniless, he told me of a forger who goes by the name of the Stranger. Paying a visit to this stranger, aka the Grey Fox, aka Corvus Umbernox, I hand him the letter and he tells me to come back in 24 hours. I pay him out 500 gold for his fee, and he tells me that Hieronymus Lex now has a glowing recommendation. My next order of business is to give this an official seal. This involves breaking into the captain's office, and the issue was that I was never out of sight for any of the watchmen. So with all eyes on me, I decided to just break into the place, and it worked out in my favor. I stamped the letter, and then went back to Anvil in order to deliver it to the Countess. She realized that Hieronymus Lex would be the best choice. She filled out his name, handed the letter back to me, and then I got tipped by the very angry Darahill. Going back over to the Imperial City waterfront, I handed the transfer papers over to Lex, and he knew it was over.
After all these years, he's finally won.
Fast traveling back to Breville, Scriva was ecstatic to hear about Lex's reassignment. I got promoted to the rank of Shadowfoot, and she rewarded me handsomely for my efforts. Up until now, the Thieves Guild has been pretty lackluster when it comes to challenges. For the most part, I've been able to walk in, grab what I need, and walk out. Stealth hasn't really been much of an issue, there hasn't been too many people to fight, but as of right now, that all changes. Methridel comes in and delivers a message from the Grey Fox. Meeting him in the city of Bruma, he asks me to retrieve Sevilla's stone from the Temple of the Ancestor Moths. Where this quest gets interesting, and in my opinion very fun, is that there's no blood price for killing any of the stone's guardians. So as soon as I get past a certain point, whatever happens is up to the 9 divines. Stealing a horse from Bruma's stables, I made the long trek east and arrived at the temple. I pried some information out of Brother Holger, and from there he led me to the entrance of the catacombs. From here, it was finally go time. Of course, my character is a low level, so the world is scaled appropriately, but I would have assumed for a later quest in the Thieves Guild, where a lot of emphasis is put on sneaking around, that these enemies would have been a little bit tougher. There were some priests and prelates who fought with swords, and those ones were certainly a little trickier, but nothing that really caused for alarm down here. It was nice because when I did my official playthrough of the Thieves Guild with my warrior character, my main goal was to actually try and sneak past everything. But with this barbarian character, it's more than okay to fight my way through the ranks. It felt like a nice change of pace, and I really appreciated that. Finally, I got to the last area and battled the final blind moth. He wasn't too tricky to defeat, and right behind him was Sevilla Stone. It was actually this area though that I found to be the most difficult, simply because of the dark Welkin stone, and I aggroed a ghost which I couldn't hit. Leaving through the secret passageway, I encountered a bug in which I've actually come across many times before. I think because the ghost was aggroed onto me and I left through a way in which it couldn't, my game registered this as always being chased by an enemy, so therefore no matter how far I got away from the temple, I could never wait or fast travel. Finally, after doing a hard reset on my game, I was able to go back to Bruma and deliver the stone to the Grey Fox. One thing that I found pretty neat was that in my original playthrough, I never found the chest which contains the note for Nocturnal's cowl. So this was my first time getting to experience the dialogue prompt with the Grey Fox and calling out his cowl as Nocturnal's cowl. Anyways, after all was said and done, I got a quest update saying to keep an eye out for another messenger from the Grey Fox. This time, Amusai showed up and he told me to meet the Grey Fox and Coral. Corvus told me to retrieve the Arrow of Extrication from Breville's Court Wizard. Traveling to the City of Swamps, I spoke with Wretched Aya and she told me that Fathus Aran keeps most of his treasures in his wizard tower. This next part was pretty interesting. I went over to the castle and followed the quest marker. It led me to the north wing of the fortress, but the issue is that there was constantly 2 guards keeping an eye on the door. It didn't seem like there were any obvious alternatives, and those guards were not moving from their station, and those guards were not moving from their post. So I decided to just pick the lock right in front of them, resist arrest, and bolt it through the castle. Arriving in Aran's quarters, I located the secret entrance and went down inside of the wizard grotto. The first enemy I got to fight was a Dremora churl. A few swings with my steel warhammer and it was defeated. After that, I took on some conjurers. They actually had incredibly low amounts of health, but when they fought together, they were able to deal some pretty good damage. Again, not to sound like a broken record, last time I went through here, my whole goal was to sneak past everything. So this time, getting to go in guns blazing, warhammer swinging, it felt pretty good. It's certainly a lot quicker and a lot less stressful when you get to use combat first in this game. Fathus Aran's Wizard Tower was where I had a lot of problems before in my previous playthrough. There were a lot of Atronachs and powerful Deja who would spot me every time. This time round though, there were only a handful of conjurers and stunted scamps, so it made my time here really easy. And unlike last time, Fathus Aran came rushing over to me. He was hostile and began attacking. I think because I was a part of the Mages Guild with my other character, he didn't really care about me trespassing, but now it seems like he really cares a lot. He wasn't too difficult of a fight, sporting some basic lower level weapons and armor. A few swings with my warhammer and he was dead, and I was then able to break into his chest and steal the arrowhead. Fleeing the tower and fast traveling back to Coral, I handed the piece over to the Grey Fox. He was thrilled, promoted me to Master Thief, rewarded me for my efforts, and told me to keep an eye out for another messenger. These quests were starting to heat up for my Barbarian, and honestly, it felt pretty nice. However, I was starting to come to certain conclusions as this faction's questline closed out. Waiting for some time, Amusai finally visited me again and told me to meet with the Grey Fox in Shadenhall. Doing so, he told me to go and find the boots of Springheel Jack. Fast traveling to the Imperial City, I spoke with Freylove the Faker, and he told me that Jack Ben, Earl of Imbel, lives in the Talos Plaza district. Breaking into his home and ascending to the upper level, I found the vampire and his butler cowering in fear. He gave me the key to the basement and I descended below. I lined up outside of the crypt, ready to face the horrors within, when all of a sudden, Jack Ben snuck up behind me. I knew this man was just waiting for me to go inside, so I decided to cut our encounter short by taking one good swing at him. To my surprise, he died instantly, and even better, the boots were on him, so I didn't even need to go through the rest of the hurdles. Immediately afterwards, a guard came running out of nowhere and tried to arrest me. At the time, I didn't realize it was for breaking and entering and not the murder that I had just committed. So I decided to resist arrest and flee the scene. 2 Imperial guards followed me far and wide outside of the city. Eventually, I got to a point where I lost them just outside of an Ayleid ruin, and I was then able to fast travel back to Shadenhall. Handing the boots over to Corvus, he told me that the next task was going to be the Thieves Guild's biggest score yet. Waiting around, Amusai appeared again and told me that the Grey Fox wanted to meet in the Imperial City. Knowing that this final quest was for all the marbles, I fenced off my goods, repaired my equipment, and bought as many weak health potions as possible. When it was time, I went over to the Grey Fox, and he told me about his master plan to steal an Elder Scroll. The first task was to enter inside of the palace's basement section and activate the Glass of Time. Being confronted by the palace guard, things were off to a rocky start as he was way more powerful than I was. He beat me down pretty quickly, and I lost a little bit of confidence in my ability to take on the guards. As a bit of a spoiler, I do get my confidence back a little later, but for now, I just decided to casually walk behind this guy's trail and interact with the giant hourglass. From the palace, I went over to the Arbitorium and climbed down into the East Tunnel section. The tunnel mostly contained nuisance creatures like rats and mud crabs. From there, I entered into the Bloodwork sewers, and the fun began. This spot was crawling with undead, mostly skeletons and vampires. Nothing too tricky or challenging to defeat, but I'm always a little nervous when fighting the vampires, as I don't want to contract porphyric hemophilia. Even with potions of cure disease on me, it feels like it's an irrational fear at this point. None of the enemies were really grouped up, and I feel like that would be my weakness for this playthrough. The sewer section was like the previous one, where I needed to raise and lower a variety of gates, soon taking me to the palace sewers. The palace sewers contained more of the same enemies. This section though was a whole lot smaller, contained less enemies, and before I knew it, I ended up at the Old Way. The Old Way consisted of mostly undead creatures. I remember last time, this was the trickiest area for me to have snuck through. There were so many ghosts, skeletons, wraiths, etc. per square foot that it seemed like there were always eyes on me. This time though, I was able to quickly bash my way through the skeletons. Something I didn't really account for though was weapon condition. As my time went on here, my warhammer was slowly becoming more and more broken. Its base damage was getting pretty poor, and I needed to pick up some other barbarian-like weapons on the way. The Lost Catacombs section was lengthy, but nothing that Grow wasn't able to truck on through. Eventually, I got to the area just before the Hall of Epochs. I fought my way through the remainder of skeletons, and just before I pressed the push block, I noticed a small bedroll. Deciding to sleep in it for a level up, I got absolutely jump scared.
You sleep rather soundly for a murderer. That's good.
Fighting my way through the Hall of Epochs, I ended up in the central room with the Ayleid statues. Instead of lowering the walls and allowing me easy access to the pressure plate, I really wanted to try and parkour my way over to it. I tried so desperately to make it work during my original playthrough, but it was practically impossible. Again, this time I struggled to make it happen. According to the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, it's possible to do, but apparently I would need crazy acrobatic skills and the boots of Springheel Jack. So I just decided to go the long way and descend to the lower levels. The only enemy of interest here was a ghost that I had no way of fighting. Fortunately, after activating the button, I didn't see the ghost again, which was good for my sanity. I fought off the undead that spilled out of the false walls, which mostly contained zombies. The zombies were actually tricky opponents to battle. I've always found them difficult at lower levels and with a lack of fire enchantment. Once done, I fired off the arrow of extrication and fought against the Ayleid Guardians. These things actually gave me a good run for my money. They were challenging, had decent health, hit hard, and made me use up some of my much needed health potions. Once done, it was time to go into the final place of interest. Within the guards' quarters, I was immediately seen by Palace Patrol. I was nervous for this encounter because just in the other room, there were at least 3 other guards snoozing. Not to mention, last time I got my face kicked in, so I wasn't sure how I was going to handle this one. The fight actually went a little better than I thought. I focused on the basic combat fundamentals, if that's such a thing, and did have to tap into my health potions. Luckily, none of the other guards woke up during our battle, and as soon as I beat him down, I was able to move on to the next zone. In the Elder Scrolls library, I was immediately seen by another guard who was picking up some scraps of paper. Deciding to get in there again, we duked it out in the hallways. For some reason, I was still pretty insistent on not switching to my other weapons, and wanted to use the Warhammer still. It dealt the most base damage, but overall DPS was certainly something that I was not considering. I had to pop far more health potions for this encounter, and only in the end did I switch to the Steel War Axe and get the better of him. From there, it was easy access into the library itself.
Celia Cameron, I present to you the Elder Scroll you requested.
I stayed silent, the monks handed me the Elder Scroll, and all that was left to do now was flee the palace. I purposefully interacted with one of them just so they would all come over to me and I could eliminate the monks one by one. They weren't any tougher than the ones from the temple, and from here I continued with my escape. I quickly ran into another palace guard and I was a little nervous for it as I was low on health potions. This time though, the Steel War Axe proved to be a champion's weapon. I found myself able to stagger the guard back a decent amount of times. I still needed to pop some health pots, but nothing too crazy here. After he was slain, I moved on to the Moth Priest's quarters. Inside, I was met with the resistance of a handful of blind monks. They fought with their fists and katanas, and to be honest, I was just happy that they weren't palace guards. I cut through them with my Steel War Axe, dropping their bodies to the floor, and all while going at a nice and steady pace. I purposefully went into their quarters and completely wiped them out. This encounter felt more like bullying than anything, but honestly, I kind of enjoyed the easier fights and change of pace. The last zone was the Imperial Battle Mage's quarters. This area was pretty free, and I had the perfect opportunity to easily slip past both Evangeline Bianique and the Palace Guard. But, to be honest, my vendetta against the Battle Mage was pretty personal. Last time, she camped the exit and made it impossible for me to leave undetected. This time, she gets up and completely leaves the fireplace. I wasn't going to let it fly, so I literally waited for her to come back and cut her down in her chambers. From there, I took the hatch back down into the old way, broke the boots of Spring-Heeled Jack, and the rest was history. I fled the sewers, emerged from the best defenses basement, and brought the scroll back to the Grey Fox. This successfully completed my challenge playthrough for a barbarian progressing through the ranks of the Thieves Guild.
Capital!
I did come to some pretty important conclusions whilst playing through this quote-unquote challenge run. The Thieves Guild questline is one that could be done with very little challenge for any class. The player can easily sneak past most NPCs and enemies regardless of skill level, and even for combat's sake, none of the areas are too tricky to fight through, say except for maybe the ultimate heist. So, when I do the Thieves Guild questline again for a challenge playthrough, I think it could be best to keep it unrelated to combat, or to make the combat restrictions very harsh, and that's something I would really like your help in choosing. I really do think though that the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood were made to be focused on their storylines and overall player enjoyment, as opposed to the Mages Guild and Fighters Guild, which are rather dependent on heavy dungeon crawling. For my previous challenge playthroughs, I tried to make the rules fairly strict, and for this one, they weren't strict enough, and I think that resulted in it being rather easy. Either way, this questline is always a treat to get to play through, and I appreciate you sticking through this video, even though it wasn't as spicy or on the edge as the previous ones. Coming up next is the Dark Brotherhood no-kill run, as well as the main quest, tutorial Goblin Staff only and with 1 life. If you have any suggestions for playthroughs, let me know down below, and until next time, keep on adventuring.